if you're new with us, this is a sensational day to be new with us because we're talking about what kind of church is this. Sometimes we do such weird stuff here that I'm always like, if you're new with us, this might not be the best day to be brand new with it. And sometimes we think that, and then families come and stay anyway, maybe because we are so weird. So we are grateful for, as we always say, the fact that we are people speaking all kinds of different languages who seek to speak the same words of grace and truth together. But we're trying to give some, maybe some new language on the same old truths. You'll hear me say again this morning, you've heard us say in this series, no new truth. New truth is a bad idea. We want old truth, old ideas. Maybe we can take those and say them in a more, in a slightly less mysterious way, perhaps. But we've been walking through this series called What Kind of Church Is This? And we ask it for ourselves, for Powell Church, to take our same old ideas, our same core values and all of that, and maybe give some new language to it. But we've been walking through this series looking at the first truths of the first church in Acts chapter 2, because whatever kind of church this is, and whatever kind of church we're going to be, we would want to make sure that we are about the things that the church from the beginning has always been about. Because at the beginning, the question would not have been, what kind of church is this? For those first people, the question would have been, wait, what is a church? And how does that work? And what difference does that make in my life? And all these things. And so we've spent 3 weeks in this series talking about our core values, our 3 core values as Powell Church. We finished that first half of the series last week by saying that Powell Church is a come-as-you-are church, where we is greater than me, and Jesus is at the center of everything. Powell Church is a come-as-you-are church where we is greater than me, and Jesus is at the center of everything. Come as you are means come as you are. I too appreciate the number of people who've asked me if I'm lying this week. As we talked about last week, at church, we believe church should be a place where you don't have to lie. That whatever we brought into this place, whatever we're walking through, whatever the people we love are walking through, that Jesus invites us not just to bring our stuff, but our very selves to him, for he is at the center of everything. Invites us to find our lives with him at the center, not just first, but at the center of everything we do. And we do that together as this we that is in fact greater than me. That's who we are. Those are our core values. You'll notice in that sentence, most of the verbs in that sentence are is. Powell Church is. This is who we be, right? This is who we are. The question we want to look at in the second half of this series today, in the next 2 weeks, is if this is who he is, if this is what kind of church we are, what's a church like this for? If this is who we are, now, what do we do? I want to start with that this morning by comparing the resurrection story in Matthew to the resurrection story in Luke. Now, if you're new with us, our church walked through the entire Gospel of Luke together for 4 months. We started reading it together January 1st. We finished reading it on Easter Sunday. It was a really powerful thing for our church to walk through one story together. We got lots of great feedback about that. We're excited to share with you next week about where we'll be going together next as a church, reading and walking through some of the same stuff together again really soon. But in the resurrection story in Luke, there are commonalities that appear in all of the resurrection stories, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Mainly, there are 3 things that you're going to find no matter which resurrection story that you read. At dawn on the first day of the week, Sunday morning, that's why you're in church on a Sunday morning, you're going to find women at the tomb, and you're going to find the presence of at least one angel there. Some other divine kind of thing is there taking place. No matter which gospel you read, no matter which resurrection account you read, you're going to find women at the tomb, angel or angels at the tomb, and all of this taking place on a Sunday morning. In Luke, the women come to the tomb. The angel says, "Why do you seek the living among the dead? He's not here. He is risen." They go back and tell the disciples, but the disciples don't really believe him. Peter runs to the tomb, finds it empty, but doesn't find Jesus. And then he goes back to his home, kind of goes back to his life. And it's not until later Jesus appears on the road to Emmaus with some disciples, but he's not really revealed to them until he's in their home. Same with the disciples. He shows up where they are, inside a home, asks, do you have anything to eat? All of that good stuff. That's how it goes in Luke. Notice something that happens differently in Matthew's account of this. And when we say differently, think of that, or I think of that as complementary. That these are two tellings of the same story that might highlight one might highlight some things that others don't. Here's the resurrection in Matthew. After the Sabbath, at dawn on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to look at the tomb. There was a violent earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven and, going to the tomb, rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance, we're talking about the angel here, his appearance was like lightning, and his clothes were white as snow. The guards were so afraid of the angel that they shook and became like dead men. The angel said to the women, the angel business card, don't be afraid. I know that you are looking for Jesus, who was crucified. He's not here. He has risen, just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay. Then go quickly, tell his disciples, he's risen from the dead, and he is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him. Now I've told you. So the women hurried away from the tomb. Notice something we say a lot. Notice the simultaneous presence of emotion. The women flee the tomb, flee's the wrong word. The women run from the tomb, afraid and yet filled with joy, and ran to tell his disciples. Suddenly, Jesus met them. Greetings, he said. They came to him and clasped his feet and worshiped him. And Jesus said to them, don't be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee, and there they will see me. 2 points to make about this story in Matthew. One is not just for Matthew, but for all of them. Consider that in our story, our Easter story, our resurrection story, theologically, we don't know exactly when Jesus was risen. Like, was it 12:01 a.m. on Sunday morning? Was it? I have no data to back this up. It's just what I like to believe. I like to believe it's sunrise is when Jesus is risen from the dead, but we don't know exactly. What we do know is that in all four Gospels, when they get to the tomb, he's not in it. So the story is not Jesus is risen from the dead and then he sits around and waits on us. The story is not Jesus is risen from the dead and he's like, come on, like, it's 3 a.m, you guys, I'm hungry, like, let's go. You got to come find me. Like, he does not wait on us. And that is good news. There's no story, there's no resurrection story where we find Jesus risen from the dead and just being like, soon as these people, I can't wait to show them, soon as they come find me. In all the accounts, he's not there. God, Jesus, from the beginning, ours is a God who makes the first move. Ours is a God who does not wait on people to do anything. God makes the first move. When we, as we celebrated last week, when we baptize babies, we do it in part because we believe God makes the first move. Babies are incapable of making many moves at all, right? I mean, the moves they do make are pretty adorable, right? But like, most of the moves that babies can make are not what we would call disciple-making moves, right? God doesn't wait. In a couple weeks, we're going to celebrate our confirmation class, babies who have grown into preteens who are capable of making some moves. But we believe that God doesn't sit around and say, as soon as you get to be 10 years old, 12 years old, then, God makes the first move. Theologically, this is not a Methodist thing, this is a Christian thing. We might all Methodist Baptists, we might say it differently, but like in our salvation, God makes the first move. God wasn't waiting on human beings to do anything to send Jesus to the cross other than sin, which doesn't take long, right? God makes the first move. Jesus is not sitting around waiting on you and I to show up and find him there in the tomb because, in fact, he's not in it. He's out. But what's weird about the Matthew story is the women come to the tomb and find it empty, and then they run, and then Jesus is right there in the next verse. But it's not told to us as like, the angel doesn't say, you're looking for Jesus, he's not here, he's risen, and by the way, he's right over there. Would you like to go see him? That's not what it says. In Matthew, if in Luke, the way Jesus is known to people is when they invite him into their home. The two followers on the road to Emmaus, they don't recognize Jesus until they invite him in. It's in the breaking of the bread, the communion verbs, when they recognize him. The disciples, it's in the home when Jesus comes into their home is when they recognize him. In Matthew, the women not only hear that he's risen, but they start following. They start doing the thing the angel told them to do. And in some way, it's in the following that they see Jesus. It's not that Jesus is right over there hiding behind a tree like, I can't wait to jump out and surprise these guys. It's not any of that. The angel says, go tell the disciples to go to Galilee. You go and tell them to go, and he will meet them there. And it's when they start the going, when they start the following, that's when Jesus appears. For Matthew, there's something to this idea that Jesus is in fact found in the following. And by the same token, so the women do the following and they see Jesus. They go tell the disciples, in this case, in Matthew, they're telling the disciples not just the tomb was empty, but we've seen the Lord. And the disciples are going to have the exact same experience. Here's a few verses later in verse 16 of Matthew 28. So the women go and tell him, we saw him, go to Galilee. And the 11 disciples, to their credit, they do it. The 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go. Notice the simultaneous presence of emotion. When they saw Jesus, and for them, this is the first time they've seen Jesus in Matthew. This is the first time they've seen the risen Lord. When they saw him, they worshiped him, but some doubted. And Jesus came to them and said, who doubted, right? Like, get out. No. Jesus came to them and said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Why is Jesus in the center? Because all authority on heaven and earth has been given to that guy. If we're going to put somebody in the center, seems like it should be him. Therefore, go. Make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. That is the end of the Gospel of Matthew. We call that the Great Commission. That story functions as kind of a partner story to Pentecost, which is what we find in Luke and Acts. In Acts, the Holy Spirit comes down and gives them the full presence of God, gives us the full presence of God in our lives. In Matthew, that idea that God is always going to be with us presents itself in the Great Commission as the close of that story. If you've been in church for 5 seconds, you've probably heard some form of the idea of the Great Commission. When we talk about what's a church like this for, no new truth. This is what we've always been called to be about. So for the women and for the disciples in Matthew, they find him in the following. They see him in the following. They don't just believe Jesus is risen because they stumbled upon him or because they went to the tomb and he was right there being like, where have you guys been? I've been awake for hours. They find him in the following. It's a very particular bent that Matthew has. They find him in the following even in the midst of the simultaneous presence of doubt and worship. That's one of the most comforting verses in the Bible to me, because some of them doubt. Or maybe all of them doubt in different ways. And these guys are processing new information pretty fast, right? So let's not be too hard on them. But I love that Jesus looks at a group of guys who are worshiping and doubting and says, go for it. Here in Matthew, he does not say, when you finish doubting, then go and make disciples. He says, go. You. All authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. Go. Go make disciples. Go teach what I taught you. Go have these teachings in the center, and I will be with you always. What is a church like this for? No new truth. The first part of our mission is make disciples. Not unique to Powell Church. Not unique to, listen, do you know what the Southern Baptist Church mission statement has in it? Make disciples, right? So this is not we're unique, and we do a lot of uniquely weird things here, and not every church has a Frankie in the lobby. But for the most part, this is what we're about. Not just we, Powell Church, but we, the church. Because from the beginning, this is what the church has been about. So I want to, before I go into the next part of this, I want to make that clear that I think most churches know, do, and understand this. But I do want to spend a minute talking about why it's the word disciples and not a different word, or not a couple of different words. We say, what's our mission? What's a church like this for? What do we do? If this is who we is, then what do we do? We say make disciples, in part because that's what Jesus says. Seems like a good idea. But I want to take just a second to say why it's make disciples and not make believers. As we said with a lot of things in this series, whether it's the Bible or loving all people or whatever the case may be, believers are good. We're for it. We are for people coming to a relationship with Jesus Christ, whatever language you like, getting saved, having a personal relationship with Jesus. When we bring, as we did last week, when we bring folks forward to be baptized, we ask them, and then we ask all of us, do you confess Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior? We believe in believers deeply. We just believe, and I think most churches believe this, we just believe that Jesus believed that from the beginning, believers does not encompass the fullness of what Jesus has called us to. What a great, one of our guys from Men of Valor Prison Ministry at our men's summit yesterday talked about this idea as well. I think it's a powerful thing. For us, so often there's this, culturally, there can be this sense of we've got to get them to the altar. And I'm 42, I'm born and raised Knoxville, Alcoa, all that good stuff. I've been Methodist my whole life, and my whole life, most of my friends have been Baptist, whatever that's worth. So I'm moonlit at a lot of Baptist churches growing up, and a lot of non-denominational churches and all that, and oftentimes experienced a very heavy call to get saved, get to the altar, all of that stuff. Maybe you've experienced something similar. In part, I think that happens in our part of the world, in the Southeast and in the Midwest, because ingrained in our culture is a history that was built on old-fashioned, they weren't old-fashioned at the time, they're old-fashioned to us, old-fashioned tent revivals. We got a picture up on the screen, not an actual, we got a painting, how about that? We got a painting up on the screen. In the 1800s, scenes like this all over the Southeast and all over the Midwest played out. Great awakenings, all these kinds of things. Early Methodist preachers, powerful in the United States in these ways, helping to shape not just the faith, but the culture of generations in ways that we still live with today. But one very practical truth about a tent revival. In the 1800s, when there's no interstates and, no drones and none of that stuff, where information and travel happened very, very slowly. When it comes to making believers, when it comes to inviting people to an altar, there was a very practical truth about a tent revival, which is if the tent revival is happening in Powell tonight and you don't get Jesus tonight, you got to go to Oak Ridge to get him tomorrow. And if you don't get him in Oak Ridge, Then he's going to, the central time zone after that. If you don't come to this altar tonight, the altar's packing up and going somewhere else. And so there was an urgency that our great, however many great grandparents lived with in a very real way, that Christianity spread through kind of a frontier sort of way with this idea of you've got to get them to the altar today. And I'm not here to say that that's bad. I'm just here to say that that's here, that that's a thing that we've lived with culturally. Altars are good, great, and beautiful. We invite you to come pray in this space every single week. But Jesus, from the beginning in the resurrection, does not say make believers. He says make disciples, which is to say, any person who comes to any altar in the 1800s and one that looked like this, or one that looks like this, or one that looks like the traditional sanctuary over there, or any of those things, any person who comes to any altar, the call on their life is to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. That Jesus is not and never has been in the business of saying, if we just get them into the altar, then they're saved, they'll go to heaven instead of hell when they die, and good job. See you up there. From the beginning, that is not what Jesus does. And the good news is much better than that. Because Jesus cares deeply, as beautiful and good as the truth about altars are, Jesus cares deeply about the next breath you take and our lives here and now. We are called not to just to make believers, but anyone who might come to faith in Jesus Christ to say, there's more. And from the beginning, it's been what Jesus has called everyone to. So we don't say make believers, we say make disciples. On the other end of the spectrum, we don't say make students. A student wants to learn from a teacher. So we are not just trying to pass off, I hope we're passing off good information in here, but we're trying to do so much more than that. A student wants to learn from the teacher. A disciple wants to be like the teacher. And that is from the beginning, the wild and crazy truth of what we believe is that you and I, come as we are, you and I, some worshiped, some doubted, you and I. Maybe we all doubt differently, you and I cannot just be saved. In some small way, you and I can be like him. One small, tiny step at a time. We'll talk more about that next week. But that in some way, our lives here and now on this earth can in some way come to reflect the life that Jesus has. We're not just trying to pass off the right theological answers so you can pass the test at the pearly gates to get in. Jesus invites us to believe, invites those first followers to believe that he's going to give us his very presence to live in us, to invite us to be his disciples. He's going to be with us from the very beginning. Let me say too, as we close, that again, no new truth. This mission statement we're going to share with you, it's not just ours. It's the United Methodist mission statement. Powell Church has been Powell Church for a long time, but Powell Church has always been a United Methodist church as long as there's been United Methodists. United Methodists are gathering in what we call General Conference last week and this upcoming week. It's a General Conference happens every 4 years. When there's not a pandemic, when there is a pandemic, it happens as soon as it can. And right now, Methodists are meeting and talking about how do we best serve and function as a global church. You may have seen in the news this week there was some amendments passed to move us toward a more regional expression of United Methodism. Things like that will come before a more local body here in the Holston Conference for votes next year and all kinds of things like that. We believe in United Methodist world that the mission is and starts with making disciples, helping people see and believe that they themselves can, in fact, one small step at a time, become more and more like Jesus. There'll be some other things that come up for votes this week. You may see some language or some votes that get changed on what we call our social principles. Social principles are not church law, but they are an attempt by the church to speak in fruitful ways about 70 or 80 different social issues, from bullying to collective bargaining to sexuality to all kinds of different things. You may see some things this week. I don't know how votes will go. You may see some things this week where you think, oh, that changed and shifted and I like that better. And you may see some things this week where you say, oh, I don't know about that. Or maybe nothing will change this week. But one truth for us that has carried me through various general conferences in the past and all of that stuff is that we get to decide what kind of church we're going to be every day. That's not a decision that makes place when people vote somewhere. That's a decision that you and I, we make together every day. Are we going to love people? Are we going to love our neighbor? Are we going to love ourselves? Are we making disciples or not? And I am deeply grateful for all the ways we get to be involved in that work together here in this place. If you've got questions on human sexuality, if you're new with us, we did a whole series on that last fall called Resurrection and Relationships. You can find that on our podcast and on YouTube. We've done listening sessions and things like that before. If we get significant change this week, I'm sure we'll do something like that again. But either way, are we making disciples or not? Because from the beginning, that's been the call and the work for all kinds of different people to continue to seek to come together and say, I got some doubts. I'm trying to come as I am. I'm trying to figure out all of this stuff, but can I believe that I am seen and known and loved by God in this space? Can I dare to believe that God might be calling even me, not just to believe in him, but to follow him? That even I can be like him, and then not only can I be like him, but that I can invite others to do that too. That our very lives, these human lives, from a Savior who tells us he'll be with us always, our very lives might be able to reflect more and more of the goodness of God. Do we love God? Do we love our neighbor? Do we love ourselves? And are we making disciples or not? That's who we are. That's who we get to decide to be every day, because this Jesus, from the beginning, this Jesus is found in the following.